Hi, everyone. Nice to see you all. We've got a great briefing ahead of us today. Looks like, let's see, we'll give it like 30 more seconds. But just really excited to get started today. We have a ton of interesting data to share with you folks. Great lineup of panelists. And hopefully lots of an opportunity for questions at the end, because I imagine that there will be a number of questions. So please, throughout this, we have a chat. Feel free to throw questions in to our Q&A, anything you have, and we'll make sure we leave time for it at the end. With that, I think it's almost 1:02, and I think we're just going to get right started because we want to make sure we have time for all of this today. So hi everyone, welcome. Nice to see you all. As you know, this is our briefing to announce some exciting new poll data that Issue 1 has put together in collaboration with YouGov about both the national scene when it comes to campaign finance, but also some very interesting data about a specific effort in Montana. And we're very excited today to have Jeff Mangan on this call with us here to talk through some of those efforts that are happening in Montana. We have Michael Beckel from Issue 1, who will be able to provide, who's been working on the scene. Huge expert, been doing this forever. Give us some of the national context that's important. And then we have John and Theo from YouGov to talk through some of the data specifically. And we're just really excited to get started. So with that, we'll jump into it. Michael, if you'll go to the next slide. And I'm Liana Keesing. I'm a policy lead at Issue 1. And I'll be kicking us off today with just sort of a brief welcome and introduction, tell you a little bit about who we are as Issue 1, what we're doing. If you go back, Michael, to the last slide, just run of show for folks' awareness. We'll be jumping first into just talking about some of the national context under which this data is gathered. That'll be Michael Beckel. Then we'll talk a little bit about the national poll data. Then I'll pass it to Jeff to explain just a little bit more context about why we as a national organization are even talking about Montana in the first place, talk a little bit through this really exciting effort that's happening there. And then we'll pass it back to the YouGov folks to talk a little bit more just about that data specifically, what it tells us, and kind of the prospects of this ballot measure that we'll be discussing. And then, like I said, we'll definitely make sure we leave time at the end for some questions. Cool. Well, like I said, just to briefly kind of introduce ourselves and give you some context. Michael and I represent Issue 1. We are an organization founded in 2013 to reduce the influence of money in politics through bipartisan reform. We have been working at the national level for many, many years on all kinds of things. If you know us from our other brands, we also more recently have started working on tech reform, on election protection, and on constitutional defense. But our core mission is and has sort of continued to be money in politics and opportunities for reform there. Michael, if you go to the next slide, you'll see, we've been doing this. I'll jump in here. We're in a sort of unique moment for money in politics work. When Issue 1 was founded in 2013, we were really operating in a post Citizens United landscape. And so much of the discussion around campaign finance had sort of calcified around political lines. And there were political narratives about who supported what when it came to campaign finance. And I think one of the takeaways that we really want to impart upon folks in this briefing is just the extent to which the narratives around that and the lines that have existed for many years have changed. Corruption, frustration with money in politics, frustration with the status quo, with the system, are universal. And frustration with both parties, I think, is something that we see repeatedly over and over again. You have people, I work on the Hill a lot of my time, so you've got everything from the Pelosi Act in Congress and the frustration with someone like Nancy Pelosi's stock trading to obviously frustrations and anger with the current administration and some of the relationships when it comes to things like the ballroom or the Qatari jet. And I think the American people are increasingly seeing evidence of that. If you go to the next slide, there's a reason that, we are increasingly talking about draining the swamp. And so I think for an organization like Issue 1, we have been doing a lot of thinking about how the landscape has evolved. If you go to the next slide, we've been doing since Citizens United report, research, trying to work on the Hill, trying to make progress. I don't mean to say that that is not possible. That continues to be possible, and we continue to engage on the Hill. That's our bread and butter. But I think increasingly we've gotten excited about approaches that speak more directly to voters and efforts at the state and local level to engage people directly. So if you go to the next slide, like I said, I'm just sort of here to talk about the really big three takeaways and kind of overview of what you'll hear today. I think first things first, money in politics is just no longer a partisan issue. Voters across all groups, whether that's partisan lines, but also all demographic groups, age groups, education groups, whatever lines you draw, they agree the system is broken and big money has too much influence. Um, I think the other takeaway is that when voters see a real path to change, they rally behind reform. And this is something we are increasingly realizing is that there is a tremendous amount of apathy and a general belief that the system cannot be changed. And so, where there are opportunities to show voters tangible reform and tangible opportunities to do so, they tend to be very excited and rally behind that reform. And that's part of the reason we're going to be talking today about, if you go to the next one, state and local efforts. So, you'll be hearing about one specific one in Montana today. There's others that Issue One is also working on and helping support. But I think we've increasingly come to believe, even as this congressionally focused organization, that state and local efforts are going to be key to the future of money and politics reform. Opportunities for Americans to translate their apathy and anger to action, I think, are one of the most essential things that organizations like us can provide. So, with that, that is sort of, again, the general themes you will hear today, but I will pass it over to Michael Beckel to provide just more context on the national landscape since Citizens United. So, Michael, take it away.
Thanks so much, Liana, and thank you again for everyone tuning in and watching. As Liana said, have been very active in the money and politics reform fight for a number of years. I myself have worked at Issue One since President Trump was elected the first time around, since the spring of 2017, so 8.5 years and counting. And before that, I worked as a reporter focused on tracking money in politics, having moved to Washington, D.C. right at the time that the Supreme Court was hearing this little-known campaign finance case called Citizens United. So I cut my teeth as a money and politics reporter at OpenSecrets.org, which does incredible work tracking money in politics. I also spent 5 years in the trenches tracking dark money and super PACs as a reporter at the Center for Public Integrity. And I have been in this fight a long time and have been really impressed with the way that Issue One is trying to build bridges and span cross-partisanship in a way that few other organizations in Washington are doing when it comes to money and politics reform. And in my entire career, Citizens United has really been this defining feature. And as Liana said, citizens in the United States, across party lines, across other demographics, are really frustrated with the amount of money that they see in politics today. Uh, Across the political spectrum, people are very frustrated with Citizens United, and some of the key assumptions that Citizens United made turn out not to be as true as the justices thought they were. There's one very telling quote in the Supreme Court Citizens United opinion that basically asserts, without any evidence, that independent expenditures cannot give rise to corruption or the appearance of corruption. And independent expenditures are just the fancy word for political advertising and other expenditures that groups do without coordinating them with the candidates that they're supporting. Although in practice, those anti-coordination rules are very, very weak, and these groups are able to work hand in hand with the candidates that they're working for. And what we see in this poll, what we're going to get into a little bit more later today, is that people are actually seeing concerns with corruption and the appearance of corruption. Uh, People are telling us through polls like this that these types of large expenditures are causing them to lose faith in our democracy. And it's so important to translate that anger and despair into real action and efforts like this very novel effort that's now underway in Montana and other really novel state and local efforts that Issue One has on its radar. So we will get into that a little bit more, but just uh, kind of to shape what we're talking about here, that there has been just an explosion of money from dark money sources, corporations, whether that's publicly funded, or publicly traded oil companies, energy companies, or groups that are technically corporations that are registered under 501(c)(4), 501(c)(6) of the tax code. These types of outside players, as well as the super PACs that they help fund, have been an enormous player in politics. We used to measure outside spending in terms of tens of millions of dollars. Now we are measuring it in the billions of dollars, with just uh, gobs of money coming in from the wealthiest individuals and some very deep-pocketed entities. Super PACs alone have emerged in the wake of Citizens United and a related lower court ruling as dominant forces in campaigns, now accounting for about 28% of all election spending. So these, again, are groups that are driving the messages that a lot of the voters are seeing in the country. They're driving negativity, and these are groups that never appear on the ballot themselves. And this is creating and driving a lot of the tension and partisanship that we see in Washington and playing out across the country. Uh, all of this also means that we are in the midst of a fundraising arms race. Candidates on both sides of the aisle feel like they constantly need to raise money to be able to fend off negative attacks from these outside groups. We've crunched the numbers here at Issue One to show that every member of Congress is waking up thinking about needing to raise thousands of dollars every day, if not tens of thousands of dollars every day. And because of this, a lot of Americans are seeing just how broken the political system is, how broken our current campaign finance system is. And what we really, are heartened by in this poll is that Democrats, Republicans, and independents alike all broadly believe that large-scale political spending by corporations, dark money, and wealthy donors are eroding some of the foundations of our democracy and see this need for reform. And so we're really excited to talk more with the YouGov team about the poll that we just conducted and its key findings.
Great, thanks, Michael. Hi, everybody. I'm John, Senior Director of Polling at YouGov, and I worked with Issue One on the survey along with my colleague Theo, who's going to talk about some of our Montana-specific results in just a few minutes. But first, what I want to do is talk through some of the table setting that we did in a national survey that we fielded around the same time as the Montana survey. So you're going to hear about two different surveys today. It's the subject so nice, we fielded it twice, and I'm going to talk through specifically the national results, and then I'm going to kick it over to Theo to discuss Montana specifically. What I'm going to be talking about is a survey that fielded the middle of October, so this is hot off the presses, fielded on YouGov and was weighted to be representative of the national population of US voters. And just to reiterate what Michael was just saying, if we go to the next slide real quick, Michael, what the survey found throughout the survey, we tried a bunch of different ways to kind of get at the various kind of angles of the issue of public spending in elections and independent expenditures. So we walked people through several different sort of ideas that surround why you might want people to be able to spend money in elections, why you might not, whether these things give rise to the appearance of corruption or not. And overall, what we found is basically no matter how we get at this, the overwhelming majority of Americans across party lines, as Michael was saying, support a variety of reforms that we're going to get into over the course of this presentation. And I want to really emphasize what's interesting about this is one of the issues that really does kind of cut across partisanship in ways that many other issues do not. From my perspective as a pollster, we are finding that things that have kind of an anti-corruption flavor to them, that is indeed quite a bipartisan and cross-partisan issue. And here we're going to find some specific results on the ways that people believe that outside spending and independent expenditures undermine democracy, create the appearance of corruption, and reduce trust in government. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to walk through some of those key results. There's a lot of data in this survey. It was a big project. I'm going to try and focus on some of the highlights and just make sure that kind of the key themes kind of come across here. So Michael, if you go to the next slide. So early in the survey, before we really got into kind of the meat and potatoes of the issue, we just sort of walked voters through kind of the basic idea in Citizens United and asked voters if they, basically agreed or disagreed with the Supreme Court's sort of argument or sort of belief that organizations like corporations and unions have the right to make these sort of unlimited expenditures in elections in the interest of free speech. We just sort of posed that argument to voters and asked if they agreed or disagreed. And overall, about 2/3 of voters disagreed with the Supreme Court's view that this type of organization inherently has the right to engage in this level of spending. So what this top bar is showing you is that about 2/3 of US voters, 63%, disagreed with kind of the construction of the argument as the Supreme Court saw it. This includes a little over 73% of Democrats, 60% of independents, and indeed a majority of Republicans, only about a third of whom actually said that they agreed with the Supreme Court. And if we look into that data a little bit more, we also walked people through various statements that they might sort of agree or disagree with about kind of the, shall we say, the kind of flavor of their motivation for those beliefs. Okay, so we basically just asked people, okay, here are some things that you might feel kind of about the way that spending works in elections these days. Just tell us if you agree or disagree with those statements. So, for example, we asked people, do you agree or disagree that large independent expenditures by donors and corporations give rise to corruption or the appearance of corruption? So again, really kind of walking through the actual arguments sort of made and stated in the case, sort of running those past voters. Did not appear to sort of pass the smell test. About 80% of US voters agreed that this type of expenditure in elections gives rise to at least the appearance of corruption. So again, something that's encouraging about these results here is that we see that's pretty strong cross-partisan support. So it's about 80% across the board, up to a little over 80% among Democrats, a little over 70% for Republicans, pretty close to the margin of error of each other. So again, pretty clearly a cross-partisan set of beliefs here. Go ahead to the next slide, Michael. We also sort of asked people, what sort of impacts does this actually have on your own behavior? And again, about 3/4 of people told us that they believed that this sort of activity causes them to, quote, lose faith in this democracy. And so if you look at this data kind of over respondents kind of across the whole the whole survey, there is kind of a sort of consistent kind of ideological core of people who are who are consistently sort of supportive of that argument. But again, broadly, 3/4 of voters disagree with this. Only about 1 in 6 or 1 in 7 consistently disagree with this sort of statement. My 2 cents here as a pollster is that this represents pretty strong, essentially unanimous cross-partisan agreement that this level of spending in elections is really not acceptable. I'm going to go ahead to the next slide. Additionally, throughout the survey, as you'll see in the data that Issue 1 puts out, we did try and walk people through kind of some of the implications of what these changes to campaign finance might actually mean for the sort of rights of organizations. So throughout the survey, there are various items where we directly pitted these ideas about, anti-corruption versus the right to free speech. And we really tried to give a fair shake to the free speech component of this issue. So for example, we had this one item where we sort of asked people to think through, okay, if we pass these new rules, are they going to make our democracy stronger because they're going to protect equal representation, or are they going to weaken our democracy because they're infringing on free speech? So again, the arguments that were actually made sort of in favor of rolling back contribution limits, we did try and test those in various different forms throughout the survey. This is one example. And if we go to the next slide, again, voters consistently tell us they believe that these sort of anti-corruption rules will actually make our democracy stronger. And you'll see that in the data. There are a bunch of different ways that we try to sort of discuss, free speech versus anti-corruption, talk about sort of like the First Amendment sort of basis of, arguments on one side versus another. And again, consistently in a cross-partisanship, we're continuously seeing pretty strong agreement that anti-corruption rules make for a better republic. Now, as a pollster, I must do my due diligence. On the next slide, I just sort of one thing I do want us to keep in mind, just sort of by way of clarification here, this is a national survey of US voters. We are still very much in a world where on a day-to-day basis, what voters are actually thinking about and are concerned about is the cost of living, is the availability of housing and healthcare, right? So again, we do find overwhelming support for these issues once voters sort of have an opportunity to kind of litigate them and offer an opinion about them. We are still very much in a world where people are concerned about, the financial system as it relates to their own pocketbooks. I think that is important context for us. But again, just to reiterate, we are seeing pretty strong and encouraging results across partisanship in favor of those reforms at the national level. So with that, I'm actually going to turn it over to Jeff to jump into the specific Montana case. So thanks, everybody. I'll pass it over to Jeff.
Thank you. I think Liana wanted to
Oh,
say something before.
just gonna jump in briefly for a second. Thank you, John. That was great. I want to emphasize for folks that there is a ton of data that we did not get to there. So we highly encourage, we'll have it released on our website at the end of the hour. We highly encourage you to look at the full national memo, which has a bunch more top lines in there, as well as the full crosstabs for that data. There is a ton of interesting stuff in there. With that, yeah, you pretty much stole my thunder. I was just going to pass it over to Jeff and say, this is, as I said earlier, this is the national context under which we've gotten increasingly excited to support innovative efforts like the one that Jeff is running in Montana. So with that, I will pass it to him and let him take it away and tell you all about it.
Thank you, Liana. I won't spend a lot of time on this because I'm just as interested in listening to Theo and John about the results as I think everyone else is. I'm heading back from Kalispell to Helena, as I had to pull over at Flathead State Park, just so everybody knows where I'm at in my car. I think I might stay here for a while because it is fairly beautiful, and invite anyone that's not from Montana to come visit us. And I think you'll fall in love with our state the way I have been here all my life, and others. So you're all welcome. You're welcome to stay. So with that, I served as Montana's Commissioner of Political Practices from 2017 to 2023, and understand full well the ramifications of the Citizens United decision and how it affects our politics in the state of Montana, and then of course across the country. And since I've left, we serve one term, can only serve one term. And since my term has been completed with the state of Montana's commissioner, this has been one of my issues that I've continued to work on, and folks continually come up to me and ask me what we can do about money and politics. And the idea of the Montana plan was born, and how we can implement a way to not overturn Citizens United, but make Citizens United irrelevant or moot. We give all corporations the general powers, not only in the state of Montana, but every state in the union. Corporations have all general powers. So all rules, regulations, laws, Citizens United, all the way to our local Corrupt Practices Act, which was overturned, and the Disclose Act from 2015 in Montana. Those all have been regulated on a power that corporations already have, that we've already given them. The uniqueness of the Montana plan is we're going to the foundation of the charter and back to not the general incorporated powers that the state's always given them, but we're going to limit what those powers are. They basically have every power that they already have, with the exception of one, and that one power is the ability to spend in politics. Without that power, the right doesn't attach, and simply makes Citizens United irrelevant in the state of Montana. And without going into it further, feel free to go to transparentelection.org. Our constitutional initiative is on the site. We have an annotated version that will walk you through why the language is in there and what it does. And we are currently in that process with the state of Montana for it to become a ballot issue that which we can begin to get signatures for and move forward. So you can move to the next slide, Liana. I know you probably can't see this, but I wanted everybody to know that we've started this process, and we're actually at the point as of last Friday. The Attorney General had, they do a legal sufficiency review And they found, and that review is whether or not the ballot meets certain foundational standards to become a ballot issue. They found ours to be legally insufficient. It wasn't something that it was something that we were expecting. Many have over the past decade. We're prepared for it. Our recourse is we appeal to the Montana Supreme Court. We plan to do that. We are working on that appeal as we speak, and we are very confident that this will become a constitutional initiative, hopefully before 2026, that we can begin gathering signatures across the state of Montana to place this on Montana's 2026 ballot in the general election. With that, I will turn it over to John, and I'm waited with bated breath to see these and listen to this presentation like the rest of us. So thank you.
That's good. I'm going to tag in Theo to walk us through the Montana results. So just by way of quick introduction, Theo is a senior analyst over on my team at YouGov. He was instrumental in getting this instrument completed, and I look forward to these remarks as well. So thanks, Theo.
Yeah, no problem. Thank you guys so much for being here and for the opportunity to talk through these results. If we could just go to the next slide. The big thing here that we kind of did a little bit differently in Montana relative to the national is we asked specifically about this Montana initiative using the real language that they're hoping to get on the ballot, and then just kind of modified some of the things we did in the national for the context that is specific to Montana in a few ways that we'll get into. But looking here, what we can really see for the most part is that, when you get from the specifics, or when you get from the general kind of national question into the specifics of Montana, support only really increases. And it particularly increases among Republican respondents who actually in Montana outpace independents on supporting these measures. And I think what we're seeing here is basically that there is a kind of pro-free speech, pro-money in politics Republican tradition that exists nationally, like not a popular tradition, but one that exists. But it is not the Montana tradition. And we're going to see consistently here that, independents are a little more uncertain, which we'd expect. They tend to be a little flakier, but Republicans here are going to support this by even higher margins than they do nationally. Moving on to the next slide. We also asked them about a prior initiative that was on the Montana that passed in Montana by an overwhelming margin. There's a long tradition of regulating campaign finance in Montana, which we were very eager to sort of dig into here. And respondents were also very supportive of that prior initiative, despite it kind of having been struck down. So that was really good to see. People are eager to take another crack at this, even given kind of developments since that initial crack. Montanans were also even more likely to disagree with the premises of Citizens United than national respondents. This makes sense, right? The prior initiative was sort of a direct attempt to challenge it, Citizens United right after it happened and it passed. So this was something we expected. But the results here are still, very striking. Particularly breaking down here, Citizens United was particularly unpopular with independents. And digging into those premises more, as we do on the next slide, looking kind of at each of those bullet points that Michael talked about from the Citizens United ruling, each of these is, deeply, voters deeply, deeply disagree with it. They agree with kind of the inverse of those points. And the one where people are kind of the most opposed, although these are all, incredibly strong disagreement with the authors of Citizens United, is the idea that large independent expenditures by wealthy donors wouldn't give rise to the appearance of corruption in and of itself. So voters really reject this. They really, think that if you see a wealthy person or a wealthy corporation spending a lot of money on politics, that they're getting something out of it. And thinking back again to some of those other messages that John talked about in terms of trying to get people to think specifically about this disagreement between sort of free speech absolutism and regulating money and participation in elections. Montanans were, again, sort of even more likely to say that they thought that unlimited money makes our democracy weaker, and regulating campaign finance makes our democracy stronger, as we can see on the next slide. And this is another one where we see that Republican support is kind of outpaces independents and is almost as strong as Democrats for this idea that unlimited spending has been bad for Montana democracy. Thinking, going back to the big picture here, as John mentioned, campaign finance, money in politics is not the biggest issue in Montana or elsewhere. It's not an insignificant issue. 17% of the population rating it as one of their top issues is not nothing. But what is sort of interesting here is that housing is a huge issue for Montana voters, up there with kind of the ones we think of as the normal top ones like inflation, jobs, and healthcare. And I think this might also be part of what we're seeing in Montana, that there is this kind of housing crisis that has been kind of exacerbated by out-of-state wealthy individuals moving into a few parts of the state. And that might be sort of increasing the salience of this idea that wealthy people, wealthy corporations are having this negative impact on Montana. And with that, I will pass it back to Liana.
Awesome. Thank you all so much. We ran through this fast, so hopefully we'll have lots of time for questions if folks have them. We have the Q&A down there, so please, please, please pop in your questions. In the meantime, I wanted to just start us off actually for a question for John and Theo, which is a little bit for those who are not well acquainted and well versed with looking at polling data. Can you talk a little bit about how these margins compare to what you usually expect to see when polling people on issues of national salience?
Yeah, that's a good question. So typically, on matters like this, there's enough. We would essentially see a larger partisan divide on most other issues like this, especially ones where, frankly, there is kind of a clear, shall we say, partisan valence. And by that, I mean the ruling came down from the court that had a certain ideological majority that usually helps people sort of figure out how somebody like them is, quote unquote, kind of supposed to feel about that issue. I will say there are other issues we have been looking at this year that have kind of a, shall we say, anti-corruption flavor to them that also do cut across party lines in a similar way to this. So this is certainly on the much higher end of kind of cross-partisan and bipartisan support in terms of reforms. There are, frankly, I think, there are reasons that we sort of expected that going into the project, but this is certainly a more kind of cross-partisan, popular set of beliefs, set of policies, set of reforms than you would find on other issues where voters are just much more divided by polarization.
And I think just to chime in a little bit on this, I think it's really striking that, both the national and state level polls that we're seeing here, there is a real cross-partisan interest in reform when it comes to our campaign finance system. Ordinary voters get how broken the system is. That doesn't always translate up to Washington, but it should. Policy leaders on both sides of the aisle should take heart that if they were to take action on anti-corruption themes, on money and politics reform issues, their voters would reward them for taking action on that front. And I think it is also really heartening that the Montana plan provides a model here for Montanans to lead the way for a new effort to combat corporate and dark money spending in our elections. And across the board, we saw a majority of support from Republicans, Democrats, independents alike, regardless of where you fall in the political spectrum and the ideological spectrum, people are interested in these types of innovative ideas.
Yeah, I mean, just to kind of say one more thing here, I think the way in which the kind of anti spending regulation category here was kind of like regularly tied with or having comparable support to the kind of not sure camp of people was really striking to me. That's not something I feel like you typically see outside of a kind of push-pulling context, and particularly here where we were really trying to motivate opposition of like give people a reason to say that they're opposed to this and still seeing that. So I think that speaks to both the kind of popularity of anti-corruption as a message right now, particularly in this current context, and to the fact that there isn't, I think Republicans or, wealthy corporations have kind of they know that the Supreme Court kind of has their back here. There isn't a lot of playing defense politically. They've kind of ceded that ground.
Thank you. Yeah, that's all I think very useful and very helpful context. I'm still, if anyone has any Q&A, throw those in. Otherwise, we'll have an easy day and can get out of here early. I did want to briefly just throw it to Jeff to talk a little bit about, these numbers that you're seeing from the polling. I'm curious a little bit for you to just talk about how they match the conversations that you're having in Montana with voters. What takeaways, stood out to you as you looked at the results of this poll?
Thank you, Liana. I appreciate that. There really hasn't been polling done around Citizens United and campaign finance for some time. So, yeah, everything's anecdotal. I had a feeling when I first started this and started talking to folks over a year ago that it was a 75-25 issue, but didn't have anything other than my gut and conversations with Montana citizens to back that up. So it's heartening. It's wonderful to see that that's how we think, and that's the state of play today. And I don't think it's certainly not just Montana, but we saw that in those nationwide numbers too. There's people know that money has broken our political system, and all voters want, and my experience, is for things to work. That's all they want. They just want things to work. And when we put something forward like the Montana plan to fix something and it's tangible and they see people are working on it and talking about it, they can get excited about it because they're trying to fix something that's broken. And that that transcends partisanship. And that's why I think we see the numbers that we see. And the one that was most striking to me was the number about when they asked, would you support an effort like this even if it didn't assist your favored candidate or issue? That number was strikingly the same, or maybe even a little higher if I recall right. So that's how strongly Montanans feel about why this needs to be fixed. They know that it's structural almost, and they also know the people that can fix it are Montanans.
Great. Thank you so much, Jeff. Well, it looks like we don't have any questions in our Q&A, which is just fine. I want to do what I was going to do anyway, which is just give all of our panelists a chance to share kind of their final thoughts and takeaways before we close this out. Anything that you think it's most important that the folks listening here know. And because I didn't warn you I was going to do this, I'll put myself on the spot first for just a second. I think at a place like Issue One, and especially for someone like me who goes to the Hill and presents these ideas so often, it is so easy to have these intuitions about how people are feeling. I'm fairly young. I have a sense of how the other people my age are thinking and feeling. And I just want to emphasize the extent to which, we thought it was important to validate our intuitions about that with this data. And I think that this data is in many ways conveying, the same ideas that we've held for so long, which is that these issues really do increasingly cut across party lines that frustration with the system exists regardless of who you're voting for. In fact, I think frustration with the system is a large driver of how people are voting these days, and that I think there is a tremendous opportunity here. Again, as we said, at the federal, at the local and state level where we can really push things forward. So that's, I think if I can hammer any one thing home, I think it would be that. Maybe John and Theo, if there's anything else you'd like to add.
Yeah, so unlike Liana, I am not young. I've been sort of looking at this stuff forever, and I will say I have also sort of been getting the sense that as shall we say, recent administrations have kind of progressed, there has been a growing kind of general sense of the importance of anti-corruption sort of as a thing, broadly speaking. We went into this project, I think I kind of shared Jeff's intuition that this is kind of a 75-25 issue. We really kind of hammered on it from every possible direction to make sure that was actually the case. That certainly appears to be the case. Something that I am sort of heartened by is, as you can see in the data, we did really kind of try to remind people that this issue, that spending has stakes for all conceivable sides of the aisle. There is stuff in the survey about how this would impact, for example, unions as well as it would impact corporations. And we really tried to make sure we had kind of a fair shake for people at kind of the stakes of that. And we continue to find that people think, the situation that we've had is ridiculous. We're increasingly tired of it. It occurs to me that often these issues are litigated at the federal level where they have been, shall we say, stuck in stasis for a long time. And so I think what we are seeing increasingly is that these smart ideas at the state and local level are providing pressure valves for a federal government that refuses to act in this regard. Which a long way of saying I'm quite delighted to see the strength of the results replicated in Montana as well. Theo, I don't know if there's anything that you wanted to add to that.
Yeah, I mean, I think the last thing that sort of comes to mind that I feel like we haven't discussed yet is the issue one team and their compatriots had this great idea to ask a follow-up question to people who opposed the national proposal in the Montana measure of why are you against this? And what was striking is it was almost 50% of the Montana sample and a plurality of the national sample who were opposed mostly just because they didn't think it could work. So, I mean, what that really said to me was, even as much as this is like a 75-25 issue or more, like the opposition here is really not about whether the idea is good or not. Voters have just seen people talk about money in politics and then not do anything about it forever, and they they need to see something work. Was kind of my takeaway there.
Jeff, as our resident person
Yep.
making something work, do you wanna finish there and then we'll pass to Michael to close us out?
I do. I'll be brief, but a little history. In 1912, Montanans passed the Corrupt Practices Act by 76%. In 2012, Montanans passed I-166, which was a policy statement that corporations are not persons with rights, and still on our books today. And in 2026, 75% of Montanans still agree. So there's some consistency there over a century and some change. And I think the reason for that is because it treats everybody the same. And Montanans see that. There are no loopholes, no gimmicks. It treats everyone the same. And I just thank Theo and John for their work and the work of Issue One, and appreciate everybody being on the call. Thank you.
Yeah, it's hard to follow that, but I think, again, as somebody who's been following money in politics very closely for the last 15 plus years, it is very true that both sides are in this fundraising arms race. Both sides are innovating new tricks to spend more and more money. Democrats and Republicans alike have embraced dark money. Democrats and Republicans alike have embraced big money, whether that's coming from wealthy individuals, from labor unions, from corporations. Each side is trying to make sure that they have all of the weapons in their arsenal. And a lot of voters are just sick and tired of that escalating arms race. Voters who typically lean Democrat, and voters who typically lean Republican. And for us, especially at issue one, where we are working to build bridges and build alliances with lawmakers and policymakers on both sides of the aisle, opportunities to tackle anti-corruption issues are real. And for me, again, I think being able to take heart in some of these innovative ideas that are appearing at the state level, whether it's the Montana plan and this ballot measure that may go before voters in Montana next year to undo Citizens United by eliminating corporate and dark money spending at the source, or looking at the ballot measure that passed in Maine last year, where 75% of Maine voters passed a measure to cap the contributions that could be given to super PACs. So super PACs could still spend unlimited amounts of money, but they, like candidates and political party committees, would have to raise it in limited chunks as well. I think there's a lot of appetite out there for a reset to make everybody play by the same set of rules and to not have big money drowning out the voices of ordinary Americans, but to have strong anti-corruption rules that allow our democracy to thrive and ensure that everyone has equal political representation in Washington and across the nation. So I thank everybody for tuning in to this call. Liana, did you have anything else that you want to add, or
No, just a
just
reminder that this has been recorded. So if you'd like a copy of this later, please let us know, and we're always happy to answer any questions and connect you to the relevant people with any of this. But thank you all so much for your time and for tuning in.
thank you so much, everybody?
So.